It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Mark Fisher. The reason why people cannot imagine the end of capitalism is because capitalism represses your imagination in your childhood, gatekeeps your access to knowledge, controls your time to oppress your perception of reality, and all of this to keep you from becoming a fully conscious, whole person, enlightened enough to fight back against the system and its power-addicted elite. So this is a section that I added in after I wrote the original script and filmed some of it. It's a little bit longer than I was expecting, but I think it's really important for the rest of the concepts and philosophies we're going to be talking about to really take this from abstract ideas to how it actually affects and applies to the current society and world that we're living in. We are currently living in society, and although we watch the news and we debate and we discuss all of these issues and concerns that are going on in the world, like homelessness, the healthcare industry, the drug war, climate change, which is causing wars and famine, natural disasters and disease, sexism, racism, classism, the epidemic of mental health disorders and personality disorders, the fact that we pretend to give a fuck about kids, but they are lowering the age of consent in many states. Child labor is on the rise. Our educational systems are banning books and hoarding more knowledge from our future generations. And politics are an identity reactionary, disastrous mess on both sides of the aisle, as well as we need to get rid of this dualism of leftist rightism. All of these things are affecting individual humans. People are dying every day. And it's very easy to get numb from that fact and forget that these are individual human beings who are supposed to be able to live a long life with their family, not die before their children. And we have to stop thinking of these as giant big issues and start thinking about the individual humans that are going through these crises all the time, including ourselves. All of these horrific things that are going on in our actual physical reality, unfortunately, get pushed to the side by the spectacle of capitalism, by media. We've had so many movies, books, media, entertainment explain this idea to us. There's WALL-E, The Matrix, Don't Look Up, Dune, Avatar, Parasite, Snowpiercer, American Psycho, Squid Games, my favorite, Westworld, and every Divergent, Mockingjay, Let's Watch Kids Kill Each Other, Ender's Maze trilogy that is actually 4 movies instead of 3, because the third book got split into 2 movies because Hunger Games did that and because capitalism wants to make more money. Always. These spectacles, although meant to enlighten us about our reality, end up distracting us from the truth of our physical reality and continue to push us further into a postmodern hyper reality. We cannot heal what we do not understand. We as individuals within the populace understand about our cognition, or about our bodies, about humanity, philosophy is very limited because these are not ideas and concepts that work well with capitalism or that are promoted without being perverted within our capitalist society. Humans are losing. We may have even lost already. And we have to decide if we're going to continue to sit around and do nothing, or are we going to come together and take back what rightfully belongs to us, which is our lives, our beings, our self, our identity, and our humanity. Guy Ernest Debord, was a French Marxist theorist, philosopher, filmmaker, critic of work, member of the Letterists International, and a founding member of the Situationist International. The Situationist International were a group of artists, writers, and social critics from 1957 to 1972. They aimed to eliminate capitalism by revolutionizing everyday life. The Situationists created alternative ways of organizing outside of unions and the workplace because they felt that the alienating effects of capitalism in society were pervasive. Basically, this means that the places in which we feel the alienation alienation from capitalism the most are not in our workplace, is when we are not at work. In the everyday experience of our life, relationships, raising children, grocery store, all of those things. Therefore, the Situationist International believed that's where some of the most revolutionary action needs to happen if we're actually going to motivate the population to do something about this horrific society we live in. After World War II, consumer culture became more dominant in Europe. Modern standards of living were ordered around the consumption of products such as automobiles, refrigerators, and washing machines. Members of the Situationist International, some of whom had belonged to the earlier avant-garde group Letterist International, formally constituted Situationist International at a conference in Cassio de Rosia, Italy, in July 1957. Its members believed that a society organized around such consumption induced boredom, while shaping people's desire in ways that could be fulfilled only through the purchase of consumer goods. In this type of society, they felt that the freedom to choose how to live was replaced by the freedom to choose what to buy, deriving its politics from Marxism, particularly from Karl Marx's ideas of commodification and of the fetishism of commodity, and from the French philosopher Henri Lefebvre's concept of everyday life as a series of dialectical moments that contained the potential to ignite a revolution. The Situationist International proposed a life outside of the dictates of capitalism. The group focused on systematically breaking from a world that required submission to the commodity. Influenced by Dadaism and Surrealism, its members developed methods of critique that articulated both the repression of a consumer culture and the liberating practices in which one could participate as a means to demolish this type of society. So one of my favorite podcasts is Behind the Bastards, and they recently just did I think it's going to end up being a 6-part series on the history of the Illuminati, and you will be surprised that there actually were secret societies and groups, and there was one called the Illuminati, and they were on some very anarchist shit. And some of the philosophies from the original Illuminati back in history did come up within the Situationist International. And I'm going to play a clip from that podcast now, and I definitely suggest that you go check out the entire series.
Now, ontology is a branch of philosophy that studies, among other things, the nature of reality, like what is true, right? Again, this is a philosophy discussion on a podcast, so we're flattening things here, but that's the basic of it, right? It is the science of like what is, how to classify and explain objects and entities. Wilson and Shea, like the Discordians, saw themselves as waging a necessary war against people's widely accepted definitions of reality. And they are looking out at millions of people being massacred in Vietnam, at police in the street beating civil rights marchers. And they are responding to what they see as all of the people perpetuating these crimes have locked themselves into what Robert Anton Wilson will later call a reality tunnel, which is this like very solidified belief about the nature of the world that is wrong but justifies violence, because the world itself will not conform to this errant belief. And so if you can't accept anything else as real, you're going to do violence on the people who insist in living in a way that does not conform to that belief you have about the world. So the thing Wilson and Shea want to do is soften people's understanding of what reality is in the hope that it will stop a lot of this horrible shit from happening.
Ontology is a branch of metaphysics in the philosophical study of being, as related to existence, becoming, and reality. Like Robert Evans, the host of the podcast, mentioned, it's basically the study of the nature of reality and like what is true. Ontology covers how to group entities into categories and what is the most foundational level of these entities. Commonly proposed categories include substances, properties, relations, states of affair, and events. These categories are characterized by fundamental ontology concepts, including things like abstractness, concreteness, or possibility and necessity. What I really wanted to grab from this clip is the idea that the current society we live in, which is based around the philosophy of gaining power as an individual, which has been the basis for capitalism since its beginning, since all the way back to the Roman Empire, and how that type of society has to be based around violence. Because if members of society aren't sharing some form of physical reality as truth, then my individual truth can outweigh your truth. And if I can't convince you of my truth to harmoniously coincide with me in society, then you will have to force your truth on me, which will always require violence. And that's a concept that our first philosophers like Plato and Socrates were really exploring when it comes to how to effectively organize a society. We are currently living in a society that is very much based on postmodern philosophy, and that is causing these reality tunnels. Postmodernism is a Western philosophy established through the social turmoil of the 1960s, spurred by social movements that question pre-existing conventions and social institutions, characterized by broad skepticism, subjectivism, or relativism, a general suspicion of reason, and an acute sensitivity to the role of ideology in asserting and maintaining political and economic power. Postmodernism is largely a reactive philosophy that is reacting to modern philosophy, particularly a reaction to a lot of the philosophy and psychology created by like Jung and Freud in the early 1900s, and the idea of human mythology and stories and our inner world, all of that, which we will get into later in this series. Many of the concepts and theories within postmodernism is just a straight up rejection to ideas and concepts that we developed from the Enlightenment period. Through the postmodern lens, reality is viewed as fragmented, locally produced, and polysemic. Social realities are constantly produced and reproduced, ever-changing through the use of language and symbolic forms. Signs, systems, objects, and symbols are viewed to have multiple meanings. So the postmodernist philosophy and theory basically excuses and allows for every individual in a society to have their own individual subjective perception of reality. I did a live stream about postmodernism on my channel Disrupted Bodies Live, so you can check that out if you want to dive into that concept a little bit deeper. But we can see by using that philosophy, everyone is experiencing their own subjective reality, and your own subjective reality is a priority in your experience within the life. In my live stream, I concluded that this is a very narcissistic, power addicted, focused philosophy, and clearly is not a good way to organize a society given the current society that we live in. This is also what is going to create those reality tunnels, which we heard Robert Evans mention in the Behind the Bastards clip. Reality tunnel is a theory that, with a subconscious set of mental filters formed from beliefs and experiences, every individual interprets the same world differently. Hence, truth is in the eye of the beholder. It is similar to the idea of representative realism and was coined by Timothy Leary. Wilson and Leary co-wrote a chapter in Leary's 1988 book, Neuropolitique, a revised edition of the 1977 book, in which they explain further. The gene pool politics, which monitor power struggles among terrestrial humanity, are transcendent in this info world, seen as a static, artificial charade. One is neither coercively manipulated into another's territorial reality, nor forced to struggle against it with a reciprocal game playing, the usual soap opera dramatics. One simply elects consciously whether or not to share the other's reality tunnel. If you have a society where every individual is stuck in their own reality tunnel, it's going to look like the debates and arguments that we're having on the left. It's going to look like people on the right going to school board meetings and screaming about critical race theory. It's going to look like Marjorie Taylor Greene just denying history and making up their own perception of history, like slavery didn't really even happen. It was about states' rights. The concept and philosophy of postmodernism allows for all of these subjective views of reality, which just causes us to fight and other each other and really hold on to the communities of identity that we connect with in order to survive, to be honest, socially, in order to get along. When someone with more power within our system wants to impose their subjective reality on your life, they can and they do, and it's typically with violence. Postmodernism is the most narcissistic philosophy that I've ever really read and tried to understand, and it explains a lot about why I have been talking about the epidemic of narcissism within our society that is a symptom of hundreds of years of capitalism, and at this point, thousands of years of societies based around individuals vying for power and not seeking wholeness with the universe, with the world, with the earth. In this next Behind the Bastards clip, it's going to discuss the spectacle, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, that keeps us distracted from coming together and actually having shared realities.
Another inspiration for Thornley Hill, Robert Anton Wilson, Robert Shea, and the other early Discordians are the Situationists, as Garrison just said. Now, these are a group of avant-garde artists and activists. They start out in France. Their basic contention, this is in like the 50s, right? Mm-hmm. So this is in the period of time and when like Greg and Carrie are like teenagers and young adults is when the Situationists are kind of at their most influential. And the basic contention that the Situationists have is that culture in the form of advertising and increasingly slick mass media is being forced upon us. The Situationists believe that you should resist cultural homogeneity with a sort of artistic judo, taking the momentum of mass media and turning it back against its wielder. Situationist art projects were supposed to have no single author or creator as they valued decentralization of creation. Artists would work together under shared names and rejected the idea of the visionary auteur. Again, you can see how this had a big influence on what Greg and Carrie and the others are doing. Key to this thinking is the idea of the spectacle. Originally defined by Guy Debord as the autocratic reign of the market economy, the media is one outward expression of the form of this autocratic reign. As Debord wrote, rather than talk of the spectacle, people often prefer to use the term media, and by this they mean to describe a mere instrument, a kind of public service. Now, this is all a little bit wonky, so I want to turn to a paragraph by Tierman Morgan and Laurie Pergy explaining the concept in more detail. Debord describes the spectacle as capitalism's instrument for distracting and pacifying the masses. The spectacle takes on many more forms today than it did during Debord's lifetime. It can be found on every screen that you look at. It is the advertisements plastered on the subway and the pop-up ads that appear in your browser. It is the listicle telling you 10 things you need to know about X. The spectacle reduces reality to an endless supply of commodifiable fragments, while encouraging us to focus on appearances. For Debord, this constituted an unacceptable degradation of our lives.
We can see with a society focused on a postmodernist philosophy, we are going to have these reality tunnels based on people's identities and politics that are then going to create conflict within our society. And we distract ourselves from those things with the spectacle. Actually, capitalism distracts us from those things with the spectacle. I like the real simple definition that Robert Evans gave in the podcast, which is the spectacle just equals media as an instrument. Any sort of media, news, movies, articles. As individuals in our society get stuck in their reality tunnels, mixed with our current evolution of modern technology, we've created these structures of hyperreality. The concept of hyperreality was created by a French sociologist and cultural theorist by the name of Jean, it's French, Baudrillard. Maybe or maybe not, I pronounced that correctly. I don't speak French. His theoretical ideas consisted of simulacrum, hyperreality, as well as influenced literary theory in the United States, and his concepts spread into modern pop culture. Baudrillard, I'm just going to call him Jean. We're just going to call him Jean. Defined hyperreality as the generation by models of a real without origin or reality. Hyperreality is a representation, a sign without an original referent. Hyperreality is seen as a condition where real physical reality is blended together seamlessly with a fiction or alternate, or for us, virtual reality. And the two come together so seamlessly that we can't tell the difference between what is really happening in the world and what is only happening on TikTok. This is developed within our postmodern society, in which the consumer and electronic images have become more real than physical reality, or hyperreal, and in which simulations of reality, or simulacra, have displaced their originals, leaving only the desert of the real.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
John Baudrillard's book, Simulacra and Simulation, was also featured in one of the first scenes in The Matrix in Neo's apartment. So The Matrix is very much trying to explain this philosophy and concepts of hyperreality, simulacrum, and simulation. Like previously mentioned, simulacra are copies that depict things that either have no original or no longer have an original. Simulation is the imitation of the operation of the real-world process or system over time. Jean Baudrillard claims that our current society has replaced all reality and meaning with signs and symbols, and that the human experience has therefore kind of become a simulated reality. There is a reason based on personality archetypes, which we're going to get into in this series, that explains why a large portion of our society has an easy time subscribing to these philosophies and viewing reality through symbols and signs and not actually seeing reality. And that was a teaser to keep you interested, okay? Just stay with me and I'll explain that whole concept later in the series. So basically, Jean Baudrillard, maybe I got that right as I kept saying it, who knows? Correct me if you speak French. Is basically saying that the adaptation of postmodernist philosophy in our current society has created a situation in which we are stuck in experiencing reality through image and symbols and versions of things that actually don't reflect their original version, their original archetype, including humanity. And this is all building on what we talked before about the postmodernism, the reality tunnel, hyperreality, simulation, simulacra. It's all connected. Hopefully I explained it well enough for everyone to see the connection. It's my biggest problem when talking about these things, is trying to find a way to explain these concepts so that they connect, so you can see how we got from A to D. Now let's discuss a little bit more about recuperation. I'm going to play another clip from that Behind the Bastards episode.
So Debord is convinced that art has failed and is essentially dead as a thing capable of carrying meaningful countercultural messages. And this is because the spectacle is an expert at something called recuperation, where ideas and individuals that were initially subversive are trivialized, cleansed of their revolutionary potential, and reincorporated to mainstream capitalist society as commodities. The easiest example of this is like a Che Guevara t-shirt, right? This communist revolutionary being turned into this like shirt that you buy at a head shop that's owned by a hedge fund.
Recuperation, or the like superpower of capitalism, which is regeneration, when it's wounded by some sort of revolutionary organization, it is always able to reheal itself. And that concept is recuperation. And we have been watching this process of recuperation working in like overdrive, especially within the last decade of capitalism. We've seen it within the Black Lives Matters movement and leaders within that movement that chose capitalism and slight reform over revolution. We saw that within that movement with all of the Buy Black capitalism campaigns. I was actually sucked into that as well a little bit during that time, and thank God I have seen the lights. The corporatization of queer culture is definitely a sign of capitalism recuperating aspects, and so the more that they can show representation for queer and Black people within the media, within the spectacle, the more that we are poo-pooed back down, the more we're like, oh, there's me on the screen. I can identify with that person. I have no need to revolutionize anything. People aren't going to like this, but the Me Too movement and cancel culture has also been recuperated back into capitalism. As well as critical race theory. And we know this because you can buy t-shirts that say #MeToo on them. That is spectacle. That is capitalism. That is not changing anything about rape culture. That is just an identity that you are wearing on your t-shirt to let other people know this is what I stand for and to be able to get kudos for it, but it doesn't do anything. And these are the aspects of this reality tunnel that has created this hyper reality within our technology and our current society that has caused us to be living in not reality, causing us to think that by watching this video or watching videos about horrific things or about other activists doing activist things is somehow an revolutionary act in itself. And it's not. It's preparing for the revolutionary act. It's learning, it's getting motivated or inspired, but it doesn't actually change anything because you can only change physical reality in physical reality. I'm going to play one last clip from this episode of Behind the Bastards, and it's going to talk about one of the tools, concepts, and ideas that this Situationist International used to fight this hyper reality.
The way the Situationists suggested fighting against recuperation was called Detournement, which is what Garrison was talking about a little bit ago. And it is the recontextualizing of an existing work of art in order to shift its meaning towards something that inspires revolutionary feelings. Now, the Situationists are also motivated by the concept of psychogeography, which is a way of describing one's surroundings in order to influence their emotional state. It's a little bit difficult to describe some of the Situationist art over a podcast, but one thing that they would do in Paris is they would cut up and reshuffle maps that were then given to people in order to encourage people to wander to different parts of the city that they would not otherwise have traveled to, and thus build connections between them, right? This is kind of part of what they're trying to do here, is trying to cut what they saw as the power that maps had over how humans thought about the geography of their cities. This is also a response to the fact that city planners set up cities in such a way to keep certain groups of people apart, right? I mean, you can think about the way this exists in whatever city you live. This is a part, look at the way bike lanes are always set up, right? They don't go to poor neighborhoods as a general rule. They connect affluent parts of town to affluent parts of town or places where people shop. That's not 100% of the case, but that is a lot of them, right? This is a thing that the Situationists are recognizing, and this is one of the things in which that the kind of art that they're doing is trying to fight against.
So unfortunately, we don't live in a world where we can reorganize maps, but I do like the ingenuity and imagination within the rebellious action that the Situationist International applied within their praxis. And so I want to hone in on this idea of detournement. It's a French word, again, so I don't know if I am saying it, pronouncing it correctly, detournement. Taking pre-existing images and mixing them together to highlight underlining ideology of the original image. The Situationist International identified film as being the most effective medium for detournement. And I think, again, a great example of everything that I just talked about is the entire Matrix series. The Wachowski sisters made a trilogy about all of these philosophies, and capitalism wanted to recuperate that with the Matrix 4, which was also supposed to be able to launch this Matrix universe of animated content and other content. And some of that may still be happening, but there aren't any more Matrix movies happening. And that is because Lana Wachowski and the genius that she is came back to do the Matrix 4 and actually stopped the cycle of recuperation within capitalism somewhat, because the Matrix 4 was about all of these concepts of reality tunnels, hyperreality, recuperation, which we see played out comically within the Matrix 4.
First of all, I know I speak for everyone when I say that I'm so excited to be working on a game that was such a, game changer. Now, the packet in front of you has our focus group research. Inside, you'll find a breakdown, including key word association with the brand. The top two being originality and fresh, which I think are great things to keep in mind as you begin working on Matrix 4.
What made Matrix different? Get F with your head.
On point. People want us up in their gray space, switching their synaptic WTF light on.
What made Matrix different? Get F with your head.
People want us up in their gray space, switching their synaptic what the hell is going on here light on.
Didn't love the first one, like some of you. And frankly, I've got zero tolerance for anything that requires a syllabus and a highlighter. I like my games big, loud, and dumb.
We need guns. Lots of guns. Matrix means mayhem.
And this action is not on brand.
She's right. Matrix is mind-born. Philosophy shiny, like BBC.
Yeah, ideas are the new sexy.
And Lana Wachowski was able to make a movie that everybody went to go see, but also ended any more movies because we didn't think it was that good. At least I hope it did, because it It wasn't that good, but it was also genius. Like after the revolution, we may look back at the Matrix 4 and just like in awe. That may be our actual favorite movie in the Matrix series because of the way it was able to fight back against recuperation within capitalism while breaking the fourth wall in the movie, like doing it in the movie while doing it in physical reality with the spectacle in the it's pretty genius. It's pretty genius. Title card. If you get rid of problems you don't like by denying them, you become more and more unaware of who you are, and you declare yourself more and more non-existent, and your devils grow and grow. Carl Jung. If we ignore our societal addiction to power or clout or influence, then the devils in our society will continue to grow and grow. The devils are fascist. They will grow and grow until they consume us, and we must resist. And this idea about the doom of a capitalist society had been foreseen over 2,000 years ago with Socrates and Plato and the beginning of philosophy, as they were trying to find purpose for humanity and how to be a good human being, as they saw a society starting to build itself based on an addiction and hunger for power. This may all sound hopeless and impossible, too big of a problem to really be able to handle, or for you to have anything or any part in revolutionary action against the simulation and hyperreality we are currently living in. But I have good news. Not only have previous humans who have lived already figured out that the society was going to end up sick, but we've had amazing humans that have been trying to solve and heal and figure out how to get out of this hopeless society also for hundreds of years. People like Marx, people like Jung. The real question is, are we going to get off our phones and actually do any of it? I hope so. I hope that my channel and this series helps give you tools and helps you understand these concepts, philosophies, and theories in a better way so that you can apply them to your own life and get out of your own reality tunnel. And that is what this educational series is about. It's about diving into how we heal society by guiding and helping not only ourselves, but others to a change in their perspective of reality and getting more people back to understanding and seeing and valuing the physical reality of what is going on. And so for this series, I actually coined a new term. Yes, I did. I know I don't have no letters behind my name, but I coined a new term, put it in my Wikipedia in the future, okay? It's what I'm going to call philosophical deterrent. And yes, I'm going to use that French word, even though I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's about the ideas, okay? If you judge me on my reading and how I pronounce words, that is part of the problem that I'm currently talking about in society right now. There's bigger, more important things. So what is philosophical determined? Well, it's basically just taking pre-existing philosophies and merging them together to emphasize the most true and effective ideologies and really find the meaning and purpose of the original philosophies. Where the Situationist International, we're talking about Detournement in the aspect of repurposing art, although I do think of philosophy as art. But in this concept of philosophical determinant, I am going to try to find the truth in a lot of the philosophies that have been created in the last 200 years, particularly around psychology, cognition, and our perspective of reality, to find tools to help us heal from the chronically ill society that we live in. Basically just taking ideologies from different psychological and philosophical studies and merging them together to find the original true purpose. And their original true purpose is some of the first steps we need to take to fight our own individual reality tunnels and our hyper-reality perspective on the world. And it is the process of self-individuation. Self-individuation is the process of self-realization or self-actualization, the discovery and experience of the meaning and purpose of life, the means in which one finds oneself and becomes who one really is, becomes a whole self, a whole identity, personality, balanced, and healthy. The word itself has roots going back to the 1600s, when it was used to identify a person as an individual or an individuation. A couple examples of individuation or self-individuation within popular movies or media would be things like Westworld and the concept of the maze, which is a visual symbol or representation for the self-individuation process of host robots within that series.
Not much to say. Maze is an old native myth.
Regale me, Theodore.
The maze itself is the sum of a man's life. Choices he makes, dreams he hangs on to. And there at the center, there's a legendary man who's been killed over and over again, countless times, but always clawed his way back to life. The man returned for the last time and vanquished all his oppressors in a tireless fury. Built a house. Around that house, he built a maze so complicated only he could navigate through it. I reckon he'd seen enough of fighting.
When I was first working on your mind, I had a theory of consciousness. I thought it was a pyramid you needed to scale. So I gave you a voice, my voice, to guide you along the way. Memory, improvisation, each step harder to reach than the last. And you never got there. I couldn't understand what was holding you back. Then, one day, I realized I'd made a mistake. Consciousness isn't a journey upward, but a journey inward. Not a pyramid, but a maze. Every choice could bring you closer to the center, or send you spiraling to the edges, to madness. Do you understand now, Dolores, what the center represents?
All hail to Jonathan Nolan. I don't know why I did this, but yeah, that's my cult-like hail quote to the Nolan brothers, who bring all of these philosophies that I'm talking about and going to be talking on this channel into all of their content and movies and series that they make, and it's mwah, mwah, mwah. I'm definitely looking forward to doing my series breaking down each episode of Westworld, which is just brilliant at explaining a lot of these concepts. If you've seen the movie Ex Machina, the test that Ava is going through, which we kind of look at as like this Turing test, is actually her self-individuation process as well, making decisions and choices on whether she's going to leave, who she's going to harm, and through that she finds her own self within reality or consciousness. And then another great example of the self-individuation process is also in The Truman Show. And it's more like Truman's arc within The Truman Show as he starts to question the nature of his reality. If you watch Westworld, you'll know where that's from. But yes, question the nature of your reality.
First, have you ever questioned the nature of your reality?
No. Have you ever questioned the nature of your reality?
Westworld, The Truman Show, and Ex Machina are some of my favorite movies, and it's interesting that this is where I found myself in life talking about when I've been obsessing over movies that have been explaining these philosophies for like a decade now. So in all of those movies, it's a very poetic and metaphorical perspective on the self-individuation process. In this series, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty, the what do I need to be doing every single day to actually go through this self-actualization process and find my whole self by merging the shadow with your valued identity. More on that later. It is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Mark Fisher. As leftists, we need to focus on evolving our own perception of physical reality, which leads to trauma healing, which then will inspire and guide others to reevaluate their perception of physical reality, which leads to enlightenment and a change in a person's value system, which leads people to being self-individuated human beings, which leads to more empathy and trust expressed to each other in all of our interactions, which leads to more understanding, more belonging, which leads to more effective organizing, which builds more resistance against the state via dual power, which leads to disruption. But it all starts with each of us as an individual growing into our most conscious and whole self. You are a soul having a human experience called life. We should probably figure out how the fuck that works and how we're supposed to do that. And step one is to like and subscribe, bitches! Yes, Google wants to know you're watching this shit, so like and subscribe so other people can see it, yeah. Oh God, Recuperation. Recuperation. To get this information to you, I still have to play the fucking capitalist game. So please share this. And this is either the end of this video or the end of this editor's interjection clip. And we're now going back to the rest of the introduction I wanted to talk about. Or this is a separate video and thanks for watching and go to the next video in this playlist. Do the YouTube things. Thank you so much. This has been Brittany with Disruptive Philosophy, and next one, catch you in it.